They say the open road is freedom, but past midnight, it becomes something else entirely. Headlights vanish into blackness, mile markers lie, and some drivers never make it to their destination. These are the 7 true roadside horror stories that prove the most terrifying things happen when no one's watching. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, and if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The road was a long, empty scar across the night, a thin line of asphalt cutting through miles of darkness. My headlights reached only a few feet ahead, swallowed quickly by the void beyond, and the hum of the tires became a heartbeat in the silence. It was the kind of night where time felt suspended, where you start to wonder if the rest of the world has quietly disappeared while you weren't looking. That's when I saw him. At first, he was just a shape in the distance, a faint silhouette illuminated by the beams of my car. He stood at the shoulder of the road, arm raised, thumb extended. A hitchhiker. It was a strange sight out here. This stretch of highway rarely saw anyone on foot, and I hadn't passed another car for nearly an hour. As I drew closer, details emerged. A worn coat hanging loosely on a thin frame, a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His head slightly bowed as if the weight of the night pressed down on him. I should have kept driving. Every instinct told me not to stop, but something about the way he stood there, calm, patient, almost expectant, tugged at me. Against my better judgment, I eased the car to the side of the road. The tires crunched on loose gravel, and the figure lifted his head. That's when I saw his eyes. Pale, almost colorless, they caught the light for a fraction of a second, and in that flash, something inside me recoiled. But before I could reconsider, he was already moving toward the passenger door. I unlocked it. He climbed in without a word, setting the duffel gently at his feet. For the first few miles, we drove in silence. The only sound was the engine's low rumble and the faint rustle of the wind sneaking in through the cracked window. I asked him where he was headed. His answer was vague, almost rehearsed. Down the road. When I pressed for more, he smiled faintly, as though I'd told a joke he'd heard before. Then he said my name. I froze. I hadn't introduced myself. My name wasn't written anywhere in the car. Yet he spoke it clearly, casually, as if we were old friends. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. "How do you know my name?" I asked. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the darkness ahead, his expression unreadable. "I've known you for a long time," he said softly. The words crawled under my skin like cold fingers. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease, but my heart had begun to race. He spoke again, this time quieter, almost to himself. "You've been here before," he murmured. "Right about here," I frowned. "I've never driven this road before." "Yes, you have," he whispered. "But last time, you didn't make it past the bend." A chill spread through me, settling deep in my chest. Up ahead, the road curved sharply into a dense patch of trees, and a thick fog began to rise from the ground, curling in pale tendrils beneath the beams of my headlights. And though I couldn't explain why, I felt something stir inside me, a memory, half buried and uninvited, whispering that he was right. The fog thickened as I approached the bend, swallowing the road and blurring the trees into shapeless shadows. My chest felt tight, like the air itself was pressing in. The stranger hadn't moved since he spoke. He sat perfectly still, pale eyes fixed on the winding asphalt ahead. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to drop him off and speed away. But curiosity, or something deeper, anchored me to the road. "What do you mean I didn't make it past the bend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head slightly, almost as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "You'll see," he said. "We both will." The words hung heavy in the air, and before I could respond, a shape emerged in the fog. At first it looked like another car. Then the details sharpened. Twisted metal, shattered glass, a dark stain spreading across the road. My headlights illuminated the wreckage of a sedan wrapped around a tree. It looked ancient, weathered by time and rain, and yet it was my car. Same model, same dent in the front bumper, same sticker peeling off the rear window. My breath caught. "What is that?" I whispered, but the hitchhiker didn't answer. He just stared at the wreckage with a look that was almost reverent. I slowed to a crawl, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. As we crept past, I caught a glimpse through the broken windshield. A body slumped over the steering wheel, hair matted with blood, skin gray with decay. The headlights hit the figure's face and the world seemed to tilt beneath me. It was me. The car lurched as my hand slipped from the wheel. I slammed on the brakes and stumbled out into the fog, my legs barely holding me. The wreck was gone. The road was empty. My headlights illuminated nothing but the pale trunks of trees and the endless dark beyond. Back in the car, the passenger seat was empty. The hitchhiker was gone. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I spun around, scanning the road, the woods, the back seat. Nothing, only silence and the lingering chill of someone who had been there just moments ago. My phone buzzed and I snatched it up with shaking hands. The screen showed a notification, a photo from an unknown number. It was a picture of me, not now, but as a child. I was standing on the side of a road at night, a small duffel at my feet, my thumb raised for a ride. And beside me stood a man with pale, milky eyes and a faint smile. The same man I'd just picked up. I stared at the photo until the screen dimmed, unable to breathe. The road ahead seemed to stretch forever, endless and unknowable. The fog parted slightly, revealing the bend still waiting for me. I don't know who he was or what I saw that night. But every time I drive alone on a dark, empty highway, I check the rear-view mirror more than I should. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I see him there, waiting for me to remember what really happened before me like a vein carved into the earth, pulsing faintly beneath the weight of my headlights. It was just past midnight, and I was hours from home, cruising through the kind of empty nowhere that swallows sound and time whole. My GPS said I was on Route 19, a road I'd driven dozens of times before. But when the calm robotic voice suddenly announced rerouting, I frowned. There was no reason to reroute. No traffic, no detours, just blacktop and silence. I glanced at the screen. A thin blue line now veered right, guiding me down an exit I didn't remember existing. The sign overhead was blank, its reflective coating scraped away by weather or something older. For reasons I still don't understand, I followed it. Maybe it was boredom, maybe curiosity, or maybe some buried instinct telling me this was a road I was meant to take. The first mile felt normal enough. Cracked pavement, guardrails curling like ribs, the occasional mile marker glinting in my headlights. But around the second mile, I noticed the first billboard. Rest Easy Motel, 10 miles ahead. A faded red arrow pointed forward. A mile later, the same billboard appeared again. Same slogan, same peeling paint, same torn corner fluttering in the wind. By the fourth time I passed it, I slowed down, convinced I was looping somehow. But the odometer climbed steadily upward, and the GPS insisted I was still moving forward. That's when I saw the coyote. It lay crumpled on the shoulder, ribs jutting through its matted fur, eyes glassy under the moonlight. I winced and drove on. A mile later, there it was again. Same broken leg, same twisted angle of its neck. Another mile, and there it was again. It was like reality itself was stuck on repeat, looping the same stretch of roadside scenery over and over. The deeper I drove, the stranger things became. The mile markers ticked higher, 221, 228, 233. But I knew Route 19 ended at mile 236. That was the last exit, the point where the highway split into city streets. But the markers didn't stop. They climbed past 236 as if the world beyond that number had always existed and I was the one who'd been mistaken. Then I noticed my fuel gauge. It should have been dropping. I'd been driving for nearly an hour since the reroute, but instead, the needle was rising. Slowly but steadily, my tank was refilling itself. The sight made my stomach twist. That was impossible. Machines don't work backward. But as I watched, the gauge crept past full and kept climbing, the numbers blinking strangely before freezing altogether. I pulled over, heart thundering, and checked my phone. No signal. The GPS map had frozen, the little blue arrow spinning uselessly in place. The night pressed in around me, heavier now, as though the air itself had thickened. I turned off the engine and stepped out onto the shoulder. The silence was absolute, not even the chirp of insects or the distant rush of cars. Just the wind and my own shallow breathing. Then, from somewhere ahead, I saw it. a flickering green glow. A mile marker, and printed on its metal face in crisp white numbers was something that shouldn't exist. 7. I stared at the number until my eyes burned. 237. It shouldn't have been there. Route 19 ended at 236. I knew that as surely as I knew my own name. But there it was, flickering faintly in the darkness, the paint too new, too bright, as if it had been placed there just for me. A cold wind slipped through the trees, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of rain, except the sky above was cloudless and still. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, but something deeper, stranger, urged me forward. I climbed back into the car and started driving again, slower this time, my hands slick on the wheel. The world around me seemed to stretch and distort the farther I went. The same billboard appeared again, but this time the letters were rearranged into gibberish, like language itself had begun to unravel. The coyote was still there, but now it was standing, watching me from the roadside, its head tilting as I passed. I checked the odometer. It had reset to 0, somewhere around what felt like the 10th mile beyond 237. The radio clicked on by itself. White noise hissed through the speakers, broken by faint bursts of something that almost sounded like a voice. I turned the dial, desperate for a station, but the static deepened, rising into a low hum that rattled the windows. And then, underneath it, I heard words. A whisper so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "You've been here before." My pulse pounded in my ears. The phrase echoed what the hitchhiker had said weeks earlier, a memory I had tried to bury. But I had never been here. I couldn't have been. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to find an exit, a sign, anything familiar. But the road stretched endlessly ahead, smooth and perfect, with no cracks, no debris, not even the faint line of stars above. It felt less like a road and more like a looped thought I couldn't escape. Then, in the distance, I saw lights. Headlights, bright and unmoving, hovering just beyond the fog. Relief flooded me. Another driver. Maybe I wasn't alone. But as I approached, the lights shifted. They weren't headlights. They were taillights, my taillights. My own car, identical in every detail, sat idling in the center of the road, its engine humming softly. I slammed the brakes. The air grew colder. My breath fogged inside the cabin. I opened the door and stepped out, my legs trembling beneath me. The duplicate car vanished like smoke. Only the empty road remained, stretching toward a horizon that never came closer. Something deep in me cracked then, a primal understanding that this wasn't a place you could find on any map. This was a trap, a fold in the world that wasn't meant to be unfolded, a place not built to be found, but to hold. I turned the car around and drove back the way I'd come, but the mile markers refused to go backward. 238, 239, 240. Numbers that didn't exist kept rising like a countdown in reverse. The fuel gauge blinked, then froze again. The road didn't want to let me leave. They say they found my car near mile 200, engine still running, doors locked, headlights burning through the dawn. I don't remember leaving it there. I don't remember how I got home. But sometimes on long empty highways, my GPS reroutes for no reason. And I swear I see the glow of mile marker 237 waiting for me again. It began on a stretch of highway so empty it felt carved out of another world. The kind of night where the sky was ink black and the road ahead looked like a thin scar slashed across the earth. I'd been driving for hours, half hypnotized by the rhythmic sweep of the headlights, when a flicker in the rearview mirror jolted me awake. At first I blamed exhaustion, tricks of the eyes, reflections of passing signs. But then I saw her, a pale face in the back seat, just behind my shoulder, watching me without blinking. I whipped my head around. Nothing. Just the crumpled jacket I'd tossed there earlier, and the faint hum of the tires against asphalt. I laughed nervously, the sound swallowed by the dark interior, and told myself it was fatigue playing cruel games. Yet when I looked back into the mirror, she was still there, faint but undeniable. And this time her lips were moving. They formed words I couldn't hear, shapes I couldn't read, like a silent warning coded into glass. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the air inside the car grew colder, heavy with an unspoken presence. Every instinct told me to pull over, but a deeper fear whispered that stopping would make her real. So I kept driving mile after mile, trying to ignore the growing clarity of that ghostly face. At some point, I stopped checking the back seat entirely. I couldn't bear the dissonance, the emptiness behind me and the woman trapped in the mirror's reflection. But curiosity is a parasite. It feeds even when you beg it to stop. My eyes kept flicking upward, drawn back to the glass like a moth to a flame. And every time, she was closer. Once, I caught the glint of something metallic against her pale skin, like a necklace or a chain. Another time, I thought I saw her hand press against the inside of the glass. Not the back seat, but the mirror itself. A thin smear, like condensation, bloomed where her fingers had been, though the surface was bone dry when I touched it. By the third hour, the radio died. My GPS froze on a blank screen. Even the hum of the engine seemed distant, as though the world beyond that mirror had gone silent. The woman's face was clearer now, her features sharp and mournful. And then, for the first time, I understood the shape of her mouth. One word, over and over. Stop. The command lodged in my chest like a splinter. What would happen if I did? What was she warning me about? I eased my foot off the accelerator, heart hammering as the speedometer dropped. That's when the headlights behind me flared to life. A car I hadn't seen all night appeared from nowhere, its beams slicing through the darkness as it closed the distance fast. I glanced at the mirror one more time. The woman was gone, but the glass still held her shape, like an afterimage burned into memory. And then, just as the light surged closer, something else moved in that reflection. Something not in my car, my mind to register. A blur of white against the ink of the night, pacing my car just beyond the beam of my headlights. My breath hitched as I craned my neck toward the window, but the space beside me was empty. Yet there it was again in the mirror, pacing effortlessly in stride like a shadow trapped in reverse. It moved with an unsettling grace, gliding rather than running, its form flickering between human and something. Stretched. And then, without warning, the rear view shifted again, and her face was back, closer than ever. This time she wasn't mouthing words. Her eyes darted behind me, wide with terror, as if begging me to see something she could and I could not. My hands trembled. I forced myself to look over my shoulder, expecting nothing, but my heart nearly stopped. The seat behind me was empty, and yet the seatbelt was buckled, tight, as if someone invisible was sitting there, restrained and waiting. The car behind me honked sharply, snapping me from my paralysis. Its headlights flashed twice like a warning. Then the driver sped up, swerving around me in a blur of silver. For a moment, their brake lights illuminated the road ahead, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the lane, perfectly still, facing away. Not the woman from the mirror. Taller, broader, waiting. I slammed the brakes. Tires screamed. My seatbelt dug into my chest as the world lurched forward. But when the dust settled and my heart stopped rattling, the road ahead was empty again. No figure, no sign of anything, just the hum of the engine and the yawning blackness ahead. Something was deeply wrong. The rules of the road, of logic, were unraveling around me. I stared back at the mirror, desperate for some clue. She was there again, and this time her mouth formed two words I could finally read. Don't look. It didn't make sense. Don't look at what? Don't look where? My gaze darted instinctively toward the passenger side mirror, and I wish I hadn't. For a split second, my reflection wasn't mine. A woman sat in the driver's seat, hands steady, eyes locked forward. Her face was pale and unfamiliar, and yet she was wearing my clothes, driving my car. The image blinked away as quickly as it came, but I knew what I had seen. And deep down, I understood the message. The reflection wasn't showing what was. It was showing what was coming. By the time I reached the next highway exit, my nerves were shredded. I pulled onto the shoulder, my hands too shaky to hold the wheel. That's when the red and blue lights flared behind me. A patrol car rolled to a stop, gravel crunching beneath its tires. The officer approached slowly, flashlight cutting through the night. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked. I nodded mutely, too drained to speak. He paused, his beam sweeping over the interior of my car. Then his brow furrowed. "Where'd she go?" My throat went dry. "Who?" "The woman in your backseat," he said, his voice steady and certain. "I saw her when I pulled up, but I was alone. Completely, utterly alone." To this day, I don't drive at night without catching myself glancing at the rearview mirror. Not for the road, but for the ghost still etched into the glass. And sometimes when the light hits just right, I swear she's still there, mouthing that same silent warning. It was the kind of night that clings to your skin, damp, heavy, and endless. The highway stretched before me like a black ribbon unraveling into nothing, and I drove it half asleep, lulled by the hum of tires on wet asphalt and the faint glow of my dashboard clock. 2:17 a.m. The time felt frozen in amber, the hour when the world is silent and the space between reality and dream seems paper thin. I was just 20 minutes from home when the radio cut out. Not a slow fade, a sudden, absolute silence. At first I thought the signal had dropped, some dead zone in the middle of nowhere. But when I turned the dial, every frequency hissed the same relentless noise. A deep, swallowing static like the sound of the universe breathing. My chest tightened. Even the emergency channel, which should never go silent, was reduced to that same void. It wasn't random either. Beneath the hiss, I could hear rhythm, faint pulses, like something coded hiding in the noise. Then the dashboard clock froze. 2:17 a.m. The second hand stopped mid-tick. My phone screen went black, though it had been fully charged. And that was when the headlights appeared. Two pale orbs in the rearview mirror, distant but steady, like eyes fixed on me. They didn't approach or fall back. They simply matched my pace. Every turn, every acceleration mirrored exactly. I told myself it was another driver, maybe as lost as I was, maybe clinging to the comfort of a shared path in the dark. But the rationalizations frayed as the minutes, or what should have been minutes, stretched into a shapeless eternity. The clock didn't move. My phone refused to power on, and the road ahead, which I knew should have split at the next junction, remained a straight, unbending line. A creeping dread slid into my chest. I pressed the gas harder, 80, 90. The headlights behind me surged in perfect sync, closing the gap by inches, but never overtaking. Sweat beaded on my palms, and the wheel felt slick, alive beneath my grip. And then through the static, a voice bled through, distant, fragmented, mechanical. It repeated one phrase, warped and broken. "Not for you." It was then I realized the radio wasn't receiving anything. It was transmitting, and whatever it was transmitting wasn't meant for human ears. The landscape began to blur too. Landmarks I'd passed hours before now appeared again. A twisted road sign, a broken mile marker, the carcass of a deer I had swerved around 20 miles back. Over and over they reappeared, looping like a broken reel. My headlights barely cut through the mist that now hung low over the asphalt. Glowing faintly in the twin beams from behind, the pulsing beneath the static grew louder, clearer, and I felt it vibrating through the chassis of the car, sinking with the thud of my heart. Then, without warning, my headlights flickered, and for a split second, the road vanished. Only a blank expanse of black stretched ahead, like I was driving into nothingness. And when the lights stabilized again, the mile marker read 2:17. Not the time, the mile. Something in the static shifted then, a tone that wasn't mechanical at all. Something closer to breathing. I killed the radio, but the static didn't die. It crawled out of the speakers and into the car. The dashboard glowed a stubborn 2:17, an unblinking eye. The headlights behind me tightened their line, not tailgating, just there, steady as a heartbeat. If interference was the disease, distance was the cure. I floored it. The engine roared, a caged animal, yet the world outside slid past like wet film. The same bent sign, the same buckled guardrail. I cut the wheel hard to test the pattern. The road obeyed, then corrected, almost gently, unseen hands smoothing the path beneath me. "Not for you." The transmission rasped again. I tried reason. EM storms can freeze clocks. Faulty alternators can fake dying phones. But what they didn't expect was the way the static learned me, the way it began echoing my breath, my pulse, matching me like a cruel duet. The headlights filled the mirror now, close enough to sketch a halo around the glass. When my brights flashed, theirs flashed. When I tapped the brakes, they breathed red. I took the shoulder. Gravel chewed under the tires, then went silent, because there was no shoulder, just the same seamless black, stitched back together behind my choice. Panic has a taste. It's copper and winter. I rolled down the window and threw my dead phone into the dark. It spun in a clean arc and never landed. It simply vanished, the night without a floor. The pulse rose to a steady thrum, and the speakers carried a new sound, not breathing, but many breaths braided together, like a crowd standing just outside the frame. The mist beside the car thickened and resolved. Two pale ropes of light that weren't headlights at all but eyes, level with mine, pace for pace. I stared too long. The wheel went light. For a heartbeat, the road fell away, and I drove in absence, a flaw cut from the negative. Then a seam, a break in the dark where the lanes unfurled into gravel, a maintenance turnout I didn't remember. I took it on instinct, tires skipping, stones spitting like bees. The static faltered. The clock shivered. 2:17 blinked. 2:18, then froze again. Behind me, the twin lights hovered at the lip of the turnout and did not cross. Whatever the signal was, the boundary refused it. I cut the engine. The world exhaled. In the sudden quiet, I heard birds, first one, then a handful, threading through the trees. Dawn bled into the edges of the sky like watercolor finding paper. The radio was truly silent finally. I waited as the pale grew brighter and the fog retreated in sheets, revealing a road, ordinary as forgetfulness. When I eased back to the asphalt, the lights were gone. The mile markers made sense again. My phone lay on the passenger seat as if it had never left. Battery full, no missed calls, no proof. I drove home slow, hollow as a rung bell, trying to believe I had dreamed a glitch big enough to swallow a highway. I'm safe, I think, but at 2:17 a.m., wherever I am, the radio cracks alive with that same far-off static, breaths braided into a whisper not meant for me. And for a few minutes, the road inside my head stretches long enough in the rearview mirror, a shape too distant to matter, too ordinary to notice. A white van, boxy and unmarked, rolling down the same empty two-lane road I'd been driving for nearly an hour. The night air was cool, and the world around me was swallowed by silence, save for the low hum of my tires against the asphalt. But something about the way that van lingered, not gaining, not falling back, settled in my chest like a weight. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A delivery vehicle finishing a late route, a night shift worker headed home. But the longer I watched it, the harder it was to believe. Its headlights were off, yet it never lost me. Every turn I made, it mirrored. Every slowdown, every speed up, it followed as if tethered by an invisible thread. And then I noticed the detail that sent a cold ripple down my spine. There was no license plate. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The dark trees blurred by on either side, and the yellow lines ahead pulsed like a heartbeat beneath my wheels. For a moment, I thought I'd lost it. But as I glanced into the mirror again, those dim, ghost-like headlights reappeared on the horizon, unwavering and patient. It wasn't chasing me. It was waiting me out. A sick thought crept in. Maybe it wasn't following me at all. Maybe it was hurting me. My GPS showed nothing but the road I knew, yet each mile felt unfamiliar, like I'd slipped into a version of it that wasn't entirely real. Even the gas stations and roadside diners I used to mark my route were gone, replaced by long stretches of darkness and trees that seemed to lean closer with every mile. The tension grew unbearable. My hands trembled against the wheel as the van crept closer, close enough now that I could see the shape of someone in the driver's seat, still unmoving, face swallowed by shadow. I needed to lose it. At the next intersection, I veered sharply onto a side road without signaling. The tires screamed. Dust exploded behind me, and for the first time in nearly 40 minutes, the mirror showed nothing but darkness. Relief hit me in waves. My chest loosened. My heart began to slow. I pulled into a lonely gas station a few miles later, its fluorescent lights flickering like a dying heartbeat. I stayed there for nearly 20 minutes, watching every car that passed, but the van never appeared. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, it was as if it had never existed. By dawn, I'd convinced myself it was a coincidence, a strange, unnerving one, but nothing more. But the next morning, as sunlight spilled across my driveway, I saw them, muddy footprints circling my car. Not mine, too large, too heavy. They trailed from the driver's door all the way to my front steps, and stopped there, as if someone had stood for a while, just watching. And that was when the fear truly set in. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, knowing someone had stood just inches from my door while I was inside, unaware? The footprints outside weren't smudged or messy like a passerby's. They were deliberate, pressed deep into the earth as though whoever left them had stood there for minutes, maybe hours. My mind replayed the image of the white van over and over, every detail sharpening into something sinister. It hadn't just followed me. It had found me. I called the police, of course. They walked the perimeter, took photos, and shrugged in the way people do when they think you're overreacting. Could be a delivery driver, one officer suggested. Could be a neighbor. But none of my neighbors wore boots that size, and no one had reason to circle my car at 3 a.m. Their words were meant to soothe, but all they did was deepen the hollow pit in my stomach. Something had stepped out of that van, and it had come right up to my door. For a few days, life returned to its usual rhythm. I went to work, forced myself to sleep, even started convincing myself that maybe I'd imagined the worst parts. But fear doesn't dissolve. It lingers, like a faint smell of smoke long after the fire's gone. And then one morning, as I backed out of my driveway, I saw it, the van, parked halfway down the block, angled toward my house. It hadn't been there the night before. It was empty, windows too dark to see through, no plates, just like before. I froze. My first instinct was to leave, to drive until the street curved out of view. But curiosity, that dangerous impulse, forced me to circle the block and pass again. Still there. This time, though, something was different. A thin thread of exhaust curled from its tailpipe. The engine was running. My heart slammed against my ribs. I dialed the police again, my voice shaking, but by the time the cruiser arrived, the van was gone. No tire marks, no trace, like it had never existed. And yet I knew it had been there. From that day on, small things began to happen. A window I was sure I'd locked would be open the next morning. My trash cans would be dragged several feet closer to the curb, though I hadn't moved them. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night and swore I saw the shape of a man standing beneath the streetlight outside. Not moving, not approaching, just standing there, watching. Weeks passed, but the fear didn't fade. It rooted itself into my routines, coiling tighter every time I stepped outside. And then one night, as I pulled into my street just past midnight, I saw it again, the van, parked across from my house, empty, silent. I told myself I wouldn't look, but my eyes betrayed me. I approached slowly, headlights off, heart clawing its way up my throat. The driver's seat was vacant. The passenger seat too, but when I placed my hand against the hood, it burned against my skin. I don't know who drives that van. I don't know why they followed me or how they keep finding me. But somewhere out there, they're watching, waiting. And every night, before I lock my doors, I check the street one last time. Because one night, I know the van won't be empty anymore. The detour sign wasn't supposed to be there. It blinked a dull orange in the dark, casting rhythmic pulses across the empty highway like a warning heartbeat. I'd driven this route 100 times, enough to know every turn and landmark by memory, but tonight the familiar road was sealed off by cones and flashing lights. Temporary reroute, the sign read, its arrow pointing toward a narrow road I didn't recognize. I hesitated, engine idling, but the night was deep and silent, and I was hours from home. Against my better judgment, I followed the arrow. The turnoff felt wrong the second my tires touched it. The asphalt was older here, cracked, uneven, lined with weeds that clawed through its surface. My headlights swept over a weathered sign half swallowed by ivy. Welcome to Brenton. I'd never heard of Brenton, and a quick glance at my dashboard GPS confirmed what my instincts were already screaming. There was nothing here. No town, no road, just a blank gray void. Still I pressed on, curiosity wrestling with unease. The air grew colder as I drove deeper, and the darkness thickened, swallowing my beams like ink. Then, just as abruptly as it had appeared, the emptiness opened into a town. Not a ghost town, not quite alive either. Something in between, like a memory caught between breaths. Gas stations stood illuminated but empty, their neon signs buzzing faintly over pumps that looked decades old. Storefront windows displayed mannequins dressed in outdated clothes, all turned toward the street as if watching me pass. Their glass eyes followed the glow of my headlights with a patience that felt human. A diner still had plates and coffee cups on its counter, steam ghosting faintly from a pot that should have gone cold years ago. The deeper I drove, the stranger it became. Every streetlight hummed with power, yet not a single car moved. The air smelled faintly of dust and ozone, like a storm that had been trapped overhead but never released. And then I saw the first billboard. At first I thought I'd misread it, a weathered ad peeling under the weight of time. But no. The letters were sharp and new, painted in clean white against the black. Welcome, my name. I slammed the brakes. My heart thundered as my headlights illuminated more signs ahead. We've been waiting. This road is yours. Come home. Dozens of them, all calling to me by name. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms. I needed to turn back. I had to turn back. I spun the wheel and headed back the way I came, tires screeching against the worn pavement. But when I reached the intersection where I'd entered, the highway was gone. No cones, no flashing detour, just an unbroken line of cracked road stretching back into town. Something shifted then. The mannequins in the shop windows weren't facing the street anymore. They were turned toward me, and somewhere in the distance, faint and deliberate, a light flickered. Once, twice, 3 times, like someone signaling that they knew I was here, searching for any sign of an exit. But every road bent back toward the center of town. It was as if the streets were folding in on themselves, reshaping around me like a maze that didn't want to let go. The radio, which had been silent all night, suddenly crackled to life, not with music or static, but with a whisper too faint to understand. My name hissed through the speakers like breath against glass. Once, twice, then silence. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I pressed the accelerator, racing through intersections and past flickering streetlights, but every corner led me deeper. The landmarks repeated in impossible patterns. The same diner, the same gas station, the same row of shops looping again and again as though the town were caught in a fever dream. And then I noticed something worse. The mannequins were no longer behind the glass. They were on the sidewalks now. They lined the streets like silent witnesses, their faceless heads tilted toward my car. Some stood in doorways, others perched on benches, and a few pressed their hands against the windows of passing buildings, as if trying to get out. Their positions shifted each time I blinked. Closer, more deliberate, always facing me. They were watching, waiting. The whispers returned, louder this time. My name again, drawn out and distorted, repeated from everywhere and nowhere. And then new words, woven between the echoes. Stay, stay, stay. It was a plea and a command all at once. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, refusing to look in the mirrors. Something told me I wouldn't like what I'd see there. I slammed the brakes at an intersection I hadn't noticed before, a narrow alley lit by a single flickering bulb. Beneath it, a sign leaned crooked against a wall. Exit. Relief flooded through me like oxygen. I didn't care how unlikely it was. It was a chance. I turned sharply and sped down the alley, its walls closing in on either side. The headlights painted the end of the path, a tunnel carved into darkness. For a moment, it felt like the world blinked. The town fell away behind me, replaced by the hum of my tires against fresh asphalt and the first hint of dawn bleeding into the horizon. The GPS came back to life with a cheerful chime, guiding me along a familiar route. Just like that, Brenton was gone, erased as if it had never been. Days passed before I spoke of it aloud. Even now, part of me wonders if I slipped into a hallucination, if exhaustion and loneliness conjured an entire town from nothing. But doubt has a way of dying quietly. Because every GPS I use now, every map app on every device, reroutes me, always without fail, down a nameless road near mile 47. It leads nowhere I recognize. No detour sign, no warning, just a blank stretch of road that doesn't appear on any official map. And yet, every time I pass it, I swear I see a weathered sign in the distance, half swallowed by ivy, whispering a name I'll never forget. Welcome to Brenton. I never took that turn again. But sometimes in the dead silence of night drives, I wonder if Brenton is still waiting, preserved like a memory that refuses to fade, patient as a place that knows I'll return. The fuel light blinked on with a soft chime, a quiet but urgent heartbeat against the emptiness around me. I'd been driving for hours across a forgotten stretch of highway, the kind of road that feels suspended outside of time, where the horizon never seems to move closer, and the stars look too far away to belong to Earth. There hadn't been a sign, a turnoff, or even another pair of headlights in almost 100 miles. When the orange glow on my dashboard started flashing, I began to wonder if I'd made a mistake coming this way at all. That's when I saw it. A flickering neon sign broke the darkness ahead. Yes, food, rest, its letters buzzing weakly against the night like a dying insect. Relief hit me in a wave. I pulled into the cracked asphalt lot, tires crunching over gravel and debris. The station looked like something pulled from a postcard of another century. A peeling red and white awning, 2 rusted pumps standing like sentinels, and a tiny glass booth with a man inside. A single bulb swung above the door, casting a sickly cone of yellow light that swayed with the wind. Something about the place felt off. The prices on the pump were impossibly low, 58 cents a gallon, and the faded posters on the window advertised cigarettes and sodas I hadn't seen since childhood. But exhaustion dulls suspicion. I needed fuel. I stepped out into the cool night air, the silence pressing heavy on my ears. The attendant inside the booth didn't move. He was tall, thin, and motionless, his face lost in shadow except for a glint of pale skin beneath the brim of a stained cap. I waved, no response. I called out. Still nothing. But when I lifted the pump nozzle, the machine whirred to life without a sound. The numbers ticking upward in sluggish mechanical clicks. The smell of gasoline filled the air, sharp and chemical, tinged with something metallic beneath it. That's when I heard it, a faint sound beneath the hum of the pump. Not wind, not pipes, a scream, muffled and distant, like someone shouting from beneath the ground. I froze, hands still gripping the nozzle, heart thudding so hard it drowned out everything else. The sound faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only the night and the whisper of the wind through the empty lot. I shook it off, told myself it was a trick of the breeze, a creak in the pipes, anything but what it had sounded like. The tank filled, the pump clicked, and I climbed back into the car. Relief washed over me as I rolled back onto the road, but the feeling didn't last. A few miles later, the gas light blinked on again. My heart stuttered. I knew I had filled the tank, yet the needle was dropping as if I hadn't stopped at all. And then the neon sign reappeared ahead. Gas, food, rest, buzzing weakly against the dark. I hadn't turned around. I hadn't taken a wrong exit, but I was back. I drove for miles, or what felt like miles, but the road only delivered me back to that same flickering sign. Gas, food, rest, the same cracked pavement, the same silent attendant, the same pump waiting like a trap that had already sprung. My fuel gauge mocked me, empty again despite the tank I'd filled. My hands shook on the wheel as I killed the engine and stepped out once more, gravel crunching beneath my boots. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, down to the loose scrap of receipt paper still fluttering beside the pump. I approached the booth slowly, hoping this time the man inside might acknowledge me. But he didn't move, not even to breathe. His stillness was unnatural, too rigid, too perfect, like a photograph pretending to be alive. And yet I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and patient. I tried the door to the booth, locked. I banged on the glass, called out, begged for an answer. Nothing, only silence, broken by the faint hum of the old lights and that strange metallic smell that clung stubbornly to the air. The scream came again, louder this time, closer. It rose from beneath the ground like something buried alive, a raw, desperate sound that scraped at my spine. I staggered back, eyes darting to the asphalt below. There was nothing but the faded white lines of the parking lot. And then I saw them. Faint, dark stains spidering from the base of the pump, seeping outward like veins. They were too red, too deep to be oil. Panic surged. I sprinted back to my car and tore out of the lot, tires screaming against the road. The sign vanished into the distance, swallowed by darkness, but my relief lasted seconds. The road ahead twisted strangely, bending into a curve that shouldn't have been there. And when it straightened again, my stomach dropped. Guess. Food, rest, I was back. I tried again. A different direction, a reckless U-turn, even reversing for miles. No matter what I did, the highway folded back on itself, returning me here. The station was a loop, a snare built from asphalt and silence. My mind raced for explanations, magnetic anomalies, hallucinations from exhaustion, some elaborate prank, but none fit. because every time I returned, the details shifted slightly. A poster in the window I didn't remember, a stain on the pump that hadn't been there before, and once, just once, the attendant's head tilted. By the fifth return, the scream beneath the asphalt had turned into voices. Dozens of them, layered and indistinct, murmuring like a language older than words. The ground beneath my feet trembled as if something beneath it was clawing upward. And through the glass of the booth, the attendant finally moved. His hand lifted slowly, not to wave, but to point, directly at me. That was the last thing I remember clearly. I woke at dawn, parked on the shoulder of a familiar road, my gas tank full and my engine cold. The station was gone. No sign, no pump, no attendant. Just empty desert stretching to the horizon. I almost believed I'd imagined it, until I looked at the receipt on my passenger seat. The ink was faded, brittle with age. The date read August 14th, 1978, and at the bottom, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was a single word. The world was already too quiet. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the darkness itself is pressing in. I'd been driving home along the interstate, a desolate stretch that cut through miles of farmland and forgotten fields, when the engine coughed once, twice, and died. I coasted to a stop beneath an overpass, a skeletal concrete bridge that loomed overhead like a monument to nowhere. My headlights dimmed, casting long shadows across the gravel shoulder. No other cars passed. No wind stirred. It was as if the world had paused just for me. I tried calling for roadside assistance, but my phone screen froze on no signal. Of course, out here in this patch of nothing, I was invisible. I stepped out of the car, the night air sharp and cold against my skin. Crickets had gone silent. Even the hum of the highway was gone. I told myself I'd flag down the next passing vehicle, but none came. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the road empty in both directions. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, distant, drifting down from somewhere beneath the overpass. At first I thought it was the wind, a trick of the concrete amplifying some distant noise. But then it spoke again, clearer this time. It said my name. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I turned toward the source, squinting into the darkness beneath the bridge. "Hello?" I called, my voice unsteady. Silence answered. Then, faint and trembling, another word. Help. It was a woman's voice. Familiar somehow, though I couldn't place it. The sound of someone I should know. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer to the overpass. My boots crunched against the gravel, each step swallowed by the echoing dark. "Are you hurt?" I asked. The voice answered again, more urgent now. "Please, come closer." I stopped at the edge of the shadows, my instincts screaming to turn back. Something was wrong. The air beneath the bridge was colder, unnaturally so, and it carried a faint metallic tang, like rust or old blood. I called out again, demanding they show themselves. That's when the voice changed. It was no longer the woman. It was my brother. His voice, his exact voice, down to the cadence, the tone. "It's safe," he said. "We're waiting for you." My breath hitched. My brother lived 3 states away. There was no reason, no way he could be here. Yet the voice was perfect. Every detail burned into my memory. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and that's when another voice joined in. My mother's. Then a friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years. One after another, they spoke from the darkness beneath the bridge, calling, coaxing, comforting. But none of them were real. And then, as I stood frozen, I heard them again, whispering to each other now. My name, my habits, my thoughts. They weren't speaking to me anymore. They were speaking about me, and whatever they were, they already knew far too much. Their whispers braided together like threads of a spider's web, overlapping and weaving into one another until I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. They spoke about the way I'd gripped the steering wheel earlier that night, about the chipped keychain I kept on my backpack, about the dream I'd had as a child, one I'd never told anyone. My heart thrashed against my ribs. These weren't echoes. They weren't guesses. Whatever hid beneath that bridge knew me, intimately, perfectly. The voices began to shift again, not just mimicking people I knew, but becoming them. My father's deep laugh rolled through the darkness, followed by the trembling cadence of my first girlfriend. Even the soft lilt of a teacher I'd adored in grade school spilled from the black. One by one they emerged, disembodied fragments of memory sewn together into a chorus that shouldn't exist. We miss you. We're here. You belong here." Each word tugged at something primal in me, something desperate to believe. But then one voice broke the pattern. It was mine. Hearing my own voice speak from the shadows shattered whatever fragile logic I'd clung to. "He's close now," it said softly. "He wants to trust us." My mouth went dry. My body screamed to run, yet I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the ground. A low hum rose beneath their whispers, a vibration that seemed to come from the concrete itself, pulsing up through my feet like a heartbeat buried deep below. I stumbled backward toward my car, fumbling for the door handle without taking my eyes off the darkness. But the whispers followed. They grew louder, clearer, closer. Shapes began to coalesce within the shadows. Not fully human, not fully formed, like silhouettes seen through frosted glass. They shifted and swayed, bending in unnatural ways, as if reality itself strained to hold them. One of them stepped closer, just enough for the edge of the light to kiss its outline. It had my brother's face, almost. But the eyes were wrong. Too wide, too black, too knowing. "We've been waiting for you," it whispered. "You were always meant to stop here." I wrenched the car door open and slammed myself inside, hands shaking as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed but didn't start. Again. Nothing. The whispers pressed against the glass now, louder and more frenzied, chanting fragments of my life back at me. Birthdays, arguments, fears I'd never said aloud. My own voice whispering from somewhere too close. "We're already inside." The last thing I remember is the engine roaring to life. Or maybe that's just what I hope happened. Because the next thing I knew, sunlight was pouring through the windshield. A tow truck idled in front of my car. A man in an orange vest tapped on the window, startling me awake. "You okay?" he asked. "We found you talking to yourself out here." "Been here all night." I wanted to tell him about the voices, the shapes, the impossible knowledge they spoke. But when I glanced beneath the overpass, there was nothing there. No movement, no sound, just the quiet hum of morning traffic. Still, every time I drive past that overpass, my radio cuts out. And if I listen closely, if I really listen, I swear I can still hear them, whispering in the static. And sometimes, I think they're still talking about me. I've driven that stretch of highway hundreds of times, but on that night, mile 46 felt different, heavier somehow, as if the air itself had thickened. The moon hung low over the fields, swollen and ghostly, and my headlights carved two narrow tunnels through the darkness ahead. I was almost home, lost in thought, when the night erupted into chaos. It happened in seconds. A screech of tires, a flash of chrome, then the violent metallic shriek of impact. Just ahead, a small sedan spun out of control, smashing into the guardrail with bone-rattling force. Sparks burst across the asphalt as the car crumpled like paper, the windshield spiderwebbing into 1,000 glittering shards. My foot slammed the brake before my mind caught up. The world slowed to a crawl, and the only sound was the pounding of my own heart. I pulled over, trembling, and grabbed my phone. "There's been an accident," I told the 911 operator, voice shaking. "Mile 46, please hurry. It looks bad." I ran toward the wreckage, gravel biting into my shoes, my breath sharp and ragged. The front end of the sedan was mangled beyond recognition, steam rising in ghostly ribbons from the hood. Through the shattered glass, I saw a figure slumped over the wheel, a man, unmoving, blood streaking down his temple. "Hey!" I shouted, reaching for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The smell of gasoline hung thick in the air, sharp and nauseating. I fumbled for my phone again, checking the signal, glancing down the road for approaching headlights. Nothing. The highway stretched empty in both directions, silent and abandoned. It couldn't have been more than 7 minutes before the first police car arrived. Its red and blue lights splashed across the asphalt as two officers stepped out, flashlights in hand. "Over here!" I called, waving them toward the wreck. But as they approached, something was wrong. Their beams swept over the shoulder and revealed nothing. The sedan was gone. The guardrail was intact. No twisted metal, no broken glass, no steam, no smell of fuel. Just an empty stretch of road and the chirp of crickets in the tall grass. My heart stuttered. "It was right here," I stammered, pointing to the patch of ground where moments ago a man had been bleeding to death. I saw it happen. I heard it. The officers exchanged a glance. "Sir," one said carefully, "there's no sign of an accident here. No debris, no skid marks. Are you sure this is the right mile marker?" I turned in a slow circle, scanning every inch of asphalt, every blade of grass, searching for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But there was nothing, not a trace. The road looked untouched, as if nothing had happened at all. That night haunted me. I replayed it over and over in my mind. The crash, the scream of metal, the man slumped lifeless in the driver's seat. It had been real. It had to be, yet the world denied it. Days passed, and I tried to move on, to bury the memory beneath the noise of ordinary life. Then, scrolling through the local paper, I froze. There it was, an obituary. The same face, the same man, but the date of death on my screen for hours. My eyes locked on the date as if staring long enough could make it change. 3 days. That was impossible. Yet there was his face, smiling gently from a life already written. I couldn't explain how I knew him, or why I'd seen his final moments before they'd happened. But I couldn't shake the sense that the universe had let me peek behind the curtain, and that I wasn't meant to. Those 3 days crawled by like a clock melting in slow motion. Every time I drove, I avoided mile 46. I rerouted, took longer roads, even left an hour early to steer clear of that cursed stretch of asphalt. But fear has a gravity of its own. It pulls you back, no matter how far you try to run. On the third night, despite every effort, I found myself there again, headlights sweeping across the familiar guardrail, the same pale moon hanging heavy above. The moment I recognized the mile marker, dread rooted itself deep in my gut. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. I glanced at the clock, 11:42 p.m., the same minute I'd seen the crash before. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity's, or maybe fate, held me in place. What if I could stop it this time? What if the reason I'd seen it was because I was meant to change it? As I crested the small rise that overlooked the bend, my heart slammed into my ribs. Headlights. The same sedan I'd seen before, gliding through the darkness toward that same inevitable point. I slowed, watching in helpless silence as events unfolded exactly as they had in my memory. The car drifted too close to the shoulder. Its rear wheels skidded, and then, in a horrifying ballet of physics and fate, it slammed into the guardrail with bone-shattering force. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled over and ran. The wreckage was just as I remembered. Twisted steel, smoke curling into the night, the faint chemical sting of leaking fuel. Through the shattered window, I saw him again, unconscious, blood tracing a dark path down his cheek. But this time, the sound of sirens was already growing in the distance. Help was coming, and I was here before the world could erase the evidence. When the first officer arrived, his flashlight beam cut across the wreckage and didn't vanish. The car was still there. The skid marks were real. The man was breathing, shallow but steady. They pulled him from the wreck and rushed him into the ambulance. As they sped away, I stood beneath the cold stars, unable to tell if I was trembling from adrenaline or awe. 3 days ago, none of this existed. Tonight it was real. And as I walked back to my car, I noticed something lying in the grass near the shoulder, a fragment of shattered glass from a headlight, still warm, as if freshly broken. I turned it over in my hand, a final whisper from a reality I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe time isn't a straight road at all. Maybe it loops back on itself, offering us glimpses of what's to come. Not so we can change it, but so we can be there when it arrives. And as I drove away from mile 46, I couldn't shake the thought that somewhere, on some other night, someone might already be watching me. Some events refuse to stay in the future. Some roads lead you back whether you want them to or not. And some moments, like that crash, exist twice. Once when you see them coming, and once when they finally arrive. The first time I noticed something was wrong. It was subtle, the kind of detail your brain almost smooths over because the alternative is too strange to believe. I'd been on the road for an hour, heading home from a weekend trip, the hum of the tires lulling me into that quiet, half-aware state drivers know too well. The sky was a bruised indigo, the moon veiled behind a curtain of thin clouds, and the highway stretched ahead like an endless black ribbon. But then I saw it, a bent green sign for Hollow Creek, 14 miles. 15 minutes later, there it was again, Same angle, same bullet hole punched through the O. I told myself I'd missed a turn. Maybe I doubled back without realizing. The human mind is good at explaining away the inexplicable, but the third time I passed that sign, denial began to unravel like a frayed rope. My GPS showed a straight line home, no loops, no turns. Yet the same gas station with its flickering open sign, the same rusted water tower with peeling paint, and the same skeletal oak tree on the horizon rolled by like scenery on a broken film reel. At first, I laughed, a nervous hollow sound meant to drown out the rising unease. Weird coincidence, I muttered, as if naming it would make it harmless. But as minutes bled into hours, the repetition became undeniable. Landmarks returned with clockwork precision, and every radio station I flipped to played the same weather report about a storm that never arrived. Even the moon seemed frozen, hanging in the same place no matter how far I drove. Panic crept in slowly, like water filling a sinking ship. I pulled over and checked my phone. No signal. My watch read 9:47 p.m. When I looked again 20 minutes later, it was still 9:47. The digital numbers pulsed back at me like a heartbeat mocking my confusion. The fuel gauge, too, refused to budge. It stayed just above half a tank, unwavering no matter how many miles I thought I'd traveled. That's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't moving forward at all. Maybe the road was circling back on itself, a serpent devouring its own tail. The fourth pass of Hollow Creek's sign stripped away the last of my rationalizations. My chest tightened. Sweat pooled on my palms despite the cold air blasting through the vents. I screamed into the empty night, demanding an answer from a stretch of asphalt that didn't care. My voice was swallowed by the dark, leaving only the steady hum of the engine and the quiet terror crawling beneath my skin. I tried everything. I sped until my tires screamed. I slammed the brakes and reversed until the taillights glared against the void. I even turned the wheel into the shoulder, off the paved road and onto the dirt. But when I crept forward again, the familiar oak tree rose on the horizon as if mocking my defiance. The world beyond this road had vanished. By the time I saw the sign for Hollow Creek a fifth time, I wasn't laughing anymore. My hands trembled on the wheel, and a sickening thought slithered through my mind. What if the road wasn't looping around me? What if it was folding itself around me, closing in, tightening its grip like a predator drawing closer to its prey? And then, on the sixth pass, something new appeared on the roadside. A figure, standing perfectly still, facing the road, facing me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the headlights, a trick born of exhaustion and fear. But as I slowed the car, the figure remained, motionless and unmistakably real. It stood just beyond the shoulder, cloaked in shadow, its outline sharp against the faint glow of the horizon. Too still to be human, too human to be anything else. As I passed, it didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even breathe. Yet somehow I felt its gaze slice through the glass and lock onto me, as though it had been waiting all along. The next time I came around the loop, it was closer. It had stepped forward by maybe a foot or two, enough that I could see more than just a silhouette now. A pale shape, a hint of clothing, the distinct impression of eyes, hollow, unblinking. And though the windows of my car were sealed tight, I swore I could hear something faint as I passed. Like a whisper chasing the wind, syllables I couldn't quite catch. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned bone white. By the seventh pass, it was at the edge of the road, waiting, watching. It tilted its head as my headlights washed over it, the gesture so unnervingly familiar that dread crawled up my spine like a spider. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished into the dark behind me, swallowed by the night as if it had never existed. But deep down, I knew it would return, and it did. Each loop brought something new, a subtle shift in the world I thought I knew. The radio static began to shape itself into words, garbled and half-formed, but undeniably speaking my name. Road signs now bore phrases instead of directions. You're almost home. Stay on the road. Don't stop. The oak tree I'd passed a dozen times before now had something hanging from one of its branches, something that swung gently in the breeze, heavy and limp. I refused to slow down long enough to see what it was. By then, fear had transformed into something deeper, something more primal. Not the fear of being lost, but of being known. It felt as though the road had studied me, memorized me, peeled me apart layer by layer. I began questioning everything. The warmth of the steering wheel beneath my hands, the steady beat of the engine, even my own heartbeat. What if none of it was real? What if I died hours ago on this road and this was what came after? Not fire or light, but a loop that never ends. I don't remember deciding to stop. I just remember slamming the brakes and stumbling out into the night air, legs shaking beneath me. The road stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness that looked less like distance and more like the edges of something alive. The figure was gone. The oak tree was gone. And for the first time, the silence was total. I knelt down and touched the asphalt. It was warm, not from the day's sun, but with a slow, rhythmic pulse. And then I heard it, a breath. Not mine, not human. A sound rising from beneath the surface, deep and patient, as if the road itself was exhaling. That was when I realized the truth I'd been too afraid to say aloud. I hadn't been driving on this road. How long I stood there before I'd heard my name. Whispered at first, then louder, then everywhere, rising from the ground, from the sky, from the wind that curled around me like a hand closing a fist. And as the darkness pressed closer, the asphalt beneath my feet shifted, almost imperceptibly, as though it were waking up. I stopped running after that night. I stopped driving altogether. But some nights, when the wind is low and the moon hides behind the clouds, I swear I can hear a road calling my name. And deep down I know, it's still waiting for me. I used to think roads were just pathways, ways to get from one place to another. But some paths don't lead anywhere. Some exist to hold you, to study you, to keep you exactly where they want you. Subscribe, if you dare.